Good afternoon. I'm delighted to join you all here today for the Compton Lecture. I want to thank the Compton Lecture Advisory Committee for their outstanding choice of our speaker today, and of course, to our special guest, Professor Jonathan Haidt. So thank you for saying yes, and welcome to MIT. After the lecture, I will have a conversation with Professor Haidt, drawing on questions that came from the community. And actually, we won't be able to accommodate all of them, but we did get quite a few questions from members of the community. But first, very quickly, some context. In 1957, MIT established the Compton Lectures to honor the memory of MIT's 10th president, Karl Taylor Compton. Dr. Compton led MIT for almost a quarter century, first as president for 18 years, I can't imagine, and then as chairman of the MIT Corporation. He guided MIT through the Great Depression and World War II, so if we think about, obstacles we're facing now, he faced them. And in the process, he helped the Institute transform itself from an outstanding technical school for training hands-on engineers to a great global university. A renowned physicist, President Compton brought a new focus on fundamental scientific research, and he made science an equal partner with engineering at MIT. In addition, during the war, he helped invent the long-standing partnership between the federal government and America's research universities, which has been very much on our minds today and during these past few years. In its long history, the Compton Lectures have brought eminent leaders to MIT in science and technology, education, economics, journalism, the arts, and politics. Today's speaker is Professor Jonathan Haidt, a prolific author and speaker who has become a leading voice for reforming society's relationship with technology. Jonathan Haidt comes to us from NYU's Stern School of Business, where he is the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership. He was an undergraduate at Yale, where he studied philosophy, and then at Penn, he earned a doctorate in psychology. The interlocking threads of those two subjects have been woven into the fabric of his career. He served on the psychology faculty at the University of Virginia from 1995 to 2011, when he left for NYU Stern, and he has served there ever since. As an academic, he sought to shed light on the evolutionary origins of human moral reasoning. But from early in his career, Professor Haidt published books that steadily captured the imagination of the broader public. In fact, I first became aware of him because my husband and seemingly most of our friends were reading his books. In 2006, he published The Happiness Hypothesis, which synthesized ancient concepts of virtue and happiness with modern scientific ideas of how to lead a psychologically healthy and meaningful life. Then, in 2012, it was The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, and I have to say that's a question we think about every day. And in 2018, he and his co-author, Greg Lukianoff, jumped to the center of the national conversation with The Coddling of the American Mind, which tackled what they argued was a culture of safetyism on American college campuses. In between books, in 2015, Professor Haidt also co-founded the Heterodox Academy, a non-partisan membership organization for faculty, staff, and students. Its mission is to advance open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement across higher education. And in 2024, he published The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And I thought that book was fantastic. To turn his findings into action, he subsequently founded the Anxious Generation Movement, a nonprofit that promotes practical reforms from policy and culture to individual action. Professor Haidt is not shy about expressing his own views, which I think you'll hear, but he has spent his life trying to help people better understand and learn from each other, despite differences. His talk today is called Life After Babel, Democracy and Human Development in the Fractured, Lonely World That Technology Gave Us. He will explore the impact of recent technologies on human development and encourage us to imagine a more positive role for technology in humanity's future. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Haidt.
Well, thank you so much, Sally. I first met Sally at an event that was really about social media's effects on kids. I know she cares a lot about it. I've had great talks today with faculty and students, and a lot of people are thinking about this issue of technology and flourishing. We always kind of took it for granted that technology is bringing us so much progress. My talk today is going to present a much more negative view of technology, and I'll explain why. And I thought twice about giving this title, kind of coming to MIT and saying, you guys are ruining everything. Like, I'm not saying that, but I am. So I tend to express views strongly and then see what happens. And so I'm going to give you, I think, a very strong talk, which was extremely critical of what's happening. And then please push back, and let's see where it goes. So I've been, my original research was on moral psychology, moral development, but for the last 10 years I've been thinking increasingly about technology to such a degree that I now sort of sometimes call myself a techno-determinist, or technological determinism, the theory that technology shapes society, culture, consciousness, etc. Now, I'm also a social scientist, and in social science, we have an allergy to one-factor explanations. So, of course, all of these things changed everything that came after. These are all incredibly important turning points in human history. But I put an asterisk there to make it clear that everything ultimately is multi-causal interactions. There are very few single-factor explanations of complex social phenomena. And most importantly, there is human agency. So I'm only partially a techno-determinist. What I mean by that is the influence of technology is so vast, especially the last couple here, that whatever you're interested in, you need to start with the technology, because that's going to shape everything downstream for decades or centuries. Start with that, and then there's also a lot of other stuff going on. That's what I mean by techno-determinism. Now, I was very pleased to see that the mission statement of MIT is basically to use technology innovation to make the world better. The mission is to advance knowledge and educate students in ways that will best serve the nation and the world in the 21st century. So that's what we're talking about today. How will technology and how can technologists work in ways that will give us more of the benefits and not just reduce the cost, but reduce some of the catastrophic costs that could be coming our way. Now, I want to start off with a note of humility here. I'm going to give you 2 reasons to not believe me. The first is that with every previous major technology, there are people who say it's the end of the world. And there's this wonderful quote from a British historian in 1830. He says, "We cannot absolutely prove that those are in error who say that society has reached a turning point, that we've seen our best days. But so said all who came before us, and with just as much apparent reason." Then he asks, on what principle is it that with nothing but improvement behind us, we look at the last 50, 100 years, we say, wow, things are getting better. On what principle could we then look forward and expect ruin? That was 1830. So I am in a long line of techno-pessimists, and they have, for the most part, big picture, been wrong, although they're right about certain specific issues. So that's caution number 1, don't believe me. Caution number 2, is that the record of people predicting the future is not much better than a coin flip. Phil Tetlock has this wonderful book, Super Forecasters, and he says human beings who hold forth on the state of the world are by and large poor forecasters than dart-throwing monkeys, okay? So once again, don't believe me. I have no special power to predict the future, but I am showing you trends that you may have heard of but might not. I'll show you some things that you probably haven't thought of. I am going to show you some trends that are happening. And if these trends continue, then the risk of catastrophic failure is enormous. But the trends generally don't, something happens. The reason why Tetlock is right is that historians or predictors, something always comes up that they didn't expect. And that often is human agency. People see a problem, they figure out a way around it. And so that's what I'm hoping to promote here in this very important audience. So please consider what I'm saying, these trends, and then work to change them. I think in metaphors, and I think to understand things that we don't understand, we need a pattern that we know to match onto a pattern, something that we don't, and then we have a sense of insight. Of course, if you have the wrong metaphor, you make mistakes, but the best metaphor I've found for what's happening to us is the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. I wrote this up in an Atlantic article. They made up the title, Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. And I'm writing a new article more on AI in the future. And so last night when I was preparing this talk, I realized, oh, I've got the title for the next article. It's why the next 10 years of life are going to be even stupider. But here's the metaphor. So in the biblical story in Genesis, it's a very short story. There's the flood. Everyone's killed except for Noah and his kids. The ark lands. The people, the animals, they come out, they repopulate the earth. And the descendants of Noah come to the plain of Shinar, and they decide to build there a city with a tower that will reach unto the heavens. And part of the reason for that is they don't want to be flooded again. So they build this tower to keep them safe so that God can't flood them again. God doesn't like this. This is human hubris. This is, really, you're going to do this so that I can't influence you? So they build this tower. Obviously, it didn't actually look like this, but this is a, 16th century, 17th century conception. And here's the key passage. The Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Humans are becoming super powerful. Humans are becoming gods. And he says, let us go down and there confound their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So in the story, God doesn't knock the tower over. But in all of our historical representations, it's been interpreted that way, as though God knocked the tower over. But in fact, what he did was he made it so that humans went from this state. I mean, imagine, you're a few generations removed from the flood, and you built this incredible city, this incredible tower, and then one day, by the way, this is the way I experienced the 1990s. People in my generation, like, the Cold War's over, we won, the internet is here, peace is breaking out all over the world. I mean, it was really, really incredible to be alive in the 1990s. But this is kind of what it feels like now, at least to some of us here. And so this is what's being conveyed in the story. Human hubris, the idea that we're all one giant, powerful species. No, we get knocked down and we can't even understand each other. That, I think, is what digital technology has done to us. It was supposed to connect us, but instead it has broken things, divided us, and made it very, very hard for us to ever have common facts, common truth, common stories again. When we look at, so what am I talking about here? I'm not talking about all of technology or all of the tech industry. I love tech, I love modernity, we're all dependent on it. I love my iPhone. And even though I did not plant that. That was a truly spontaneous demonstration of what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about a subset of technology that I think is different. We don't see that yet, but I'm going to try to show you this is different. I just made up the term social tech. And so if this was the OED definition of technology, the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes, especially in industry, practical purposes. So social tech I'm defining as the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes that directly alter human connection and development. If you guys want to figure out how to improve oil refining or get to Venus, great, go at it. But if you've got ideas for how to rearrange social relationships and none of you are psychologists, you're engineers, please don't. Just don't, okay? And so I think where we are is now some of these are social, like writing is social technology. Printing press, so these are social technology. All of these in color are social technology. And all of them, yes, okay, there was a couple hundred years of war, but then we got these amazing liberal arts, liberal democracies. So we're used to the idea that, there's a period of adjustment, but then we adapt to it. It might take a while, but we adapt to it, right? We've adapted to all of these, and we see them as very, very positive, even though each one, when it came out, was thought to be disruptive and to have problems. My argument today is that these two are different. These two are very, very different. And the reason, there are a lot of reasons, but the ones I'll start with, are that these two are so powerful in terms of their effects on us as humans. They're moving so fast, and they're accelerating, so that we won't be able to adapt to them. They just keep speeding up. And they are so damaging to human development that we don't have much time. Because as I'll show you, humans born after 1995 are on average diminished. You won't see that here at an elite school like MIT, but I'll show you the stats. Around the world, people are getting diminished, less intelligent, less happy, less competent, and it's happening very fast. And my claim, my argument is that if we continue with the current trends, as AI is coming in, it's going to accelerate. The decline of humanity is going to accelerate. That's my argument. Again, can't predict the future, but these are what the trends are now. So these are the points that I'm going to make. I'll go through this briefly. This is sort of the structure of the essay that I'm playing with for the Atlantic. So I'm excited. This is my first time saying this in public. We'll have two parts here. One is what it's doing to human development. That's where I know the most. That's where I've been studying for a long time. And then also what it's doing to democratic citizens, not just democracy. There's a lot of problems it does to democracy, but what does it take to be a citizen of a democracy? We have a lot of thinking about that in this country, going back to the founding fathers. And I think that what social tech is doing is making it very hard to be a citizen of a liberal democracy in the ways that the democracy needs. So that's the structure of the rest of my time, my 38 minutes and 52 seconds left. So let's start with the mental health degradation. This is what we know the most about. So my book, The Anxious Generation, is a tragedy in 2 acts. In Act 1, we take away the play-based childhood. Everybody here over 35 played outside after school. And those of us who grew up in the 70s, there was a giant crime wave. And there were drunk drivers. And some of those drunk drivers were us. So it was, it was much more dangerous than it is now. The world is so safe. If you grew up in the 2000s, crime is plummeted. Drunk driving is mostly gone. So, but even still, we freaked out in the 1990s especially. We took away the play-based childhood. But teenagers didn't get depressed. The internet was coming in. They liked computers. They spent a lot of time on computers. It's not until we get to Act 2 that everything falls apart. Act 2 is very, very sudden, 2010 to 2015. Very, very sudden, a few years. When the iPhone comes out in 2007, here, I'll show you the process. But I can summarize the whole book, especially, raise your hand if you are parents of kids under 16. How many of you have kids under 16? Okay, so you still have maybe a little bit of influence left on them. I should have said 12, I suppose. My argument in the book is that we have overprotected our children in the real world, where they need huge amounts of experience and challenge and unsupervised play. We took that away. And instead, we underprotected them online, where we say, here, go at it. Go talk to strange men around the world that want things from you. So here's what happens. Suppose you were a millennial. Suppose you were born in 1990, okay? I'm really focused on puberty as a psychologist. Puberty is a sensitive period for brain change in which culture and adult identity get formed and sort of locked into the brain. So if you are born in 1990, you're a millennial, you begin puberty, let's say around 2002, around age 12, plus or minus. And you might get a cell phone, maybe when you're 13, 14, 15, at some point you get a cell phone. So you go through puberty with a communication device in your hand. And there are only 3 things you can do on it. You can call people, you can text people, and millennials, what's the 3rd thing you did on your Motorola Razors? Snake, that's what they're, so, right? I don't remember that, but all millennials say snake, okay? That was it, all right? So millennials are fine. The millennials, their mental health is actually a little better than Gen X, okay? So that's what puberty was. Then the iPhone comes out in 2007, but very few teens have one at first. It's not really until the iPhone 4 and 5 you get the front-facing camera. So suppose instead you're born in the year 2000. So now you begin puberty around 2012. 2012 is the turning point year. In 2010, the iPhone is out, but very few teens have one. By 2015, everyone has one. 2012 is literally the year that it switches. It's also the year that Facebook buys Instagram. They don't change it at first, but huge publicity. All the girls, even middle school girls, are now on Instagram, beginning in 2012. And as you can see here, the iPhone is very different. There's not just 3 things you can do, 2 of which are communication. There's a million things that you can do, and you are now fodder for the attention economy. The millennials didn't get stuck in the attention economy until they were in college or later. Their brains had gone through puberty. The definition of Gen Z, I believe, is someone who went through puberty with social media. Another way to illustrate this is that this is what childhood used to be like. And people who grew up in the 70s and 80s, you remember, if an extraterrestrial lands, like, you don't need to go get adults. You know, you put it in your bicycle basket, you ride around. You know, we had a lot of autonomy to do intergalactic communication. You know, that would never happen today. This is what childhood has turned into. Childhood now is very, very solitary. Girls are on social media, especially. Boys are playing video games. And if you're a boy, you can't go over to your friend's house because then you can't play with him. You have to go to your house where you can put on your headset, your controller, your avatar, and then you can play with your friends. So childhood has become very, very solitary. And it's exactly at this moment, that we get this very sharp, these hockey stick shapes in the mental health graph. So this is data aggregated across universities from their mental health centers. In 2012, all of our students, all of our undergrads were millennials. Gen Z begins to arrive 2013, 2014. And these are the rates of things that go up a little bit. Well, what's the yellow one? The yellow one is psychological disorders. It just suddenly starts rising, and it's everywhere. It's not just elite schools, it's not just on the coast, it's everywhere. And here's, to go into more detail, it's not all disorders. These were the rates that students would, this is why they would show up at the counseling center. And anxiety and depression have always been the top causes. Those are like the common colds of mental health, very, very common. In 2010, they were very, very common. And then we enter this period and anxiety and depression skyrocket. This is the main change. It's gendered. I could show you so many graphs. That is, especially anxiety, depression, girls and women start off with higher levels at puberty. Their levels increase. And then they go up even further, so that it is now just normal. If you're an American teenage girl, at least 1 in 3 or chance or more that you're anxious, depressed, and you've thought about killing yourself in the last year. That's just normal. It's a common way to be if you're an American teenage girl. And it's not just that they report. It's not just, oh, Gen Z, they're so comfortable talking about it. That was a criticism I used to get. Oh, this isn't real. This is just self-report data, I was told. It's just a change in the way they talk about it. No, because you see the same patterns around the world in behavior. So this is self-harm. 10 to 14-year-old girls is where you see the biggest changes. 10 to 14-year-old girls did not used to cut themselves, and they did not used to kill themselves. Those numbers were extremely low before 2010. And then this happens. The number pentuples. These are girls taken into hospital emergency rooms for self-harm. If they didn't do it in 2010, by 2015, it becomes very, very common. And it was when I discovered that it's not just us. As I began working on this project, I had my research assistant at the time, Zach Rausch, he's the head of the lab now. I had him gather all the longitudinal data he could find on mental health trends around the world. And it was instantly clear. All the Anglo countries, exact same time, exact same way, same gender differences. Scandinavia also almost identical. Europe, Eastern Europe less so. When countries are getting richer, that mutes the effect. But in the developed Western world, it's all over the place. Just to give one example, here's self-harm data from Britain based on medical examination of medical records. No trend before 2010, and then this happens. Again, it's a hockey stick. It's like a light switch. Something happened around 2012, and girls started cutting themselves and killing themselves. Boys too. I mean, suicide is both. And it's not just the Western countries. We don't have good longitudinal data from most countries, but we do have some international surveys of happiness and well-being, like Gallup and a few others. And it was a fact of psychological life. I learned this in positive psychology, that there's a U-shaped curve of happiness. The happiest people turn out to be the elderly, actually. People in their 60s and 70s are actually the happiest people. And the second happiest people are people in their late teens and 20s. That was just an article of faith. And it's the people in the 30s and 40s. They've got work pressures, parents, kids. Of course, midlife is hard. But you have this U-shaped curve of happiness. Well, you did until 2015. David Blanchflower, an economist at Dartmouth, has looked across multiple data sets all around the world. Youth used to be happier than middle-aged people, and in the space of 5 or 10 years, that's gone down to either be even or below. So in many countries now, young people are the least happy, and that was never true before 2015. So we're facing a global decline in human happiness and flourishing. There's never been anything like this big, this widespread, this sudden. Now, some of you, raise your hand if you've heard, look, everything I just showed you is a correlation. This happened, and the smartphone came in just then. See? So that is a correlation. I was showing you historical correlations. How many of you have heard that there's no evidence of causation, that all the data here is just correlational? Raise your hand if you've heard that argument. Okay, so that's what Mark Zuckerberg says. And I've met him twice, and I've argued with him about it twice, and I show him studies. I say, no, there's experimental evidence. There's so many different kinds of evidence. He said it again 3 weeks ago in Los Angeles in the trials. Hundreds of parents thousands of parents are suing. Hundreds have kids who are dead because of design features of social media. And he repeated that. And so I just want to say, just very briefly, it is absolutely not true. And I have a paper coming out with Zach Rausch in the World Happiness Report in about 3 weeks. Here's a snippet of it, is the title. And what we show is that there are 7 different lines of evidence, only one of which is correlational. So the victims themselves, young people say, this is hurting us, and a third of teenage girls say it harmed my mental health. That's not a correlation. That is a direct report of harm from the people who know best what's happening, the people who see it every day, who know what's going on. Who else has a good view of it? Parents and teachers and therapists. They have a good view of what's going on. They believe social media is damaging mental health. That's not a correlation. That's a direct report from people who've seen it happen over the last 10 or 15 years. There's what the perpetrators say. We now have thousands and thousands of pages of their internal reports and research studies. My team has gathered together everything that can be found, about 31 studies that Meta itself did. Meta has user log data. Meta knows exactly what was shown to each child. They know what their emotions were afterwards from their behavior. So Meta is best placed to know what's going on. And they have many, many studies showing harm. Some are correlational. One, called Project Mercury, was a direct it was an RCT. They called it an RCT, randomized controlled trial. They got some thousands of users were asked to get off of Facebook or Instagram for a week and then get back on, and they found that their mental health improved when they got off. So it's like, okay, you say it's correlational, but then I show you experiment after experiment, and you did one of the experiments, and you still say there's no evidence? So I'm just really, and then of course, and we go through the academic studies. There's correlational studies, of course. There are longitudinal studies. There are about 25 RCTs, and there are quasi-experiments. They all line up. So if you want to find this paper, just Google Mountains of Evidence, Haidt. You'll find, catchy, huh? You'll find this paper, and it'll be out. There'll be publicity about it in 3 weeks. All right, so that's the mental health degradation. That's the one that we understand the best. And when I wrote the book, I focused on that, and I thought that was the biggest thing, because it's huge. What I've just shown you is shockingly huge, right? Did any of you know that this was going on globally? So it turns out it's not the biggest thing. There's something bigger. It is the destruction of the human capacity to pay attention, because this is affecting most people, including most adults. And if you imagine humanity with 10 to 50% of its attentional ability sucked out of it, there's not much left. Like, we're not very capable of doing stuff if we can't think, focus, or stay on a topic for more than 30 seconds. So briefly, we see this most clearly in the educational stats. So Derek Thompson, one of the best data journalists and analysts, wrote this 2 years ago. And he was talking about the fact that we see this in the educational stats. In the US, we have the NAEP, it's like the nation's report card. And when you could see how scores dropped during COVID, and all the analysts, oh my God, COVID was so terrible, look what it did. But it'll bounce back because it was just COVID, right? Okay, and they didn't notice, nobody commented on the fact that the downturn didn't start in 2021, it started after 2012. But it'll bounce back, right? Not exactly. Here's NAEP scores for math for 8th graders, this happens to be. When you break it up by quartile or decile, what you always find is that for the most able students, the ones who can pay attention, the best students, their drop doesn't begin until COVID, and they're coming back. Okay, so that's the top students. But look at the bottom 50%. Their drop began after 2012. So it's already dropping by 2015. And it continues to drop after COVID. So we're kind of giving up on half of the population, or 60 or 70% of the population. So you may not see it in your circles. Many of you are from elite schools, wealthy families, educated parents. The drop isn't as much there, but we're losing most of the country. 50 years of progress in education, 50 years of progress, up in smoke, gone. We're back to where we were 50 years ago. That's pretty big. That's pretty serious. How many hundreds of billions of dollars have we paid, have we tried to improve education? It's all gone. And it's happening around the world. The PISA data set, PISA is 35 roughly countries around the world, and we see the same thing. No drop in PISA scores until the Great Rewiring period, and then they also drop around the world. It's not every single country that's dropping, but on net, it's happening around the world. And that's after 50 years of IQ rising. You've all heard discussion, especially professors, have all heard discussion of these articles, these reports about how young people find it difficult to read. Even at elite schools, students find it hard to read a book. I was talking about this with my students. I teach a flourishing class at NYU. And as one of my students said, I open a book, I read a sentence, I get bored, this is always here. And you know, books have boring paragraphs in them. TikTok doesn't. So, and even more recently, now we're finding that many members of Gen Z can't watch a movie because you have to multitask. That's 90 minutes without being on social media, without scrolling. I can't do that. So if you can't even watch a movie, again, the human capacity to pay attention is the foundation of every big thing we do. You can't really achieve anything if you don't have your attention. It was when I saw that it's not just the kids, that it's actually the adults as well. This is what really freaked me out and made me realize this is the biggest thing. So there's a great series of articles by John Byrne Murdoch in the FT. So this is American high school seniors reporting how many days in the last 30 did you have difficulty thinking or concentrating? A slight increase up to 2010. Did you have trouble learning new things? No trend before 2010. And then this happens. So our students are suddenly reporting that they find it hard to learn new things, hard to focus. That's basically when we put computers on their desk. What a stupid thing to do. A computer is a multifunction entertainment device that kids are using all day long at home, and we put them on kids' desks. They watch TikTok, video games, and porn. That's what computers are for. And so to put them on desks decimated education. The biggest, the most costly mistake we've ever made in the history of American education, to put computers and iPads on kids' desks, one-to-one device policies. We thought it was an equity move. We thought like, oh, rich kids have computers, we need to make sure everyone has a computer. No. Well, I guess at MIT, it sounds like you don't do this, but a lot of us outside of MIT are beginning to realize we can't allow laptops in our classrooms, even for our grad students, because I teach in a business school. They're checking their portfolio, they're shopping, they're texting. So it hit very suddenly. We don't know if it's the phones or the computers on desks, but it hit very suddenly. And then this is what blew me away. This is a test of literacy and numeracy. And the literacy test is like, you read 2 paragraphs about toast. And then you have to answer 2 questions about toast. Okay? And it's right there in the paragraph. Can you do it? And the percentage of people who can't do it, if we look at the US, it was like 17%, about 18, 19%, and it actually drops a little bit, maybe 17, whatever it is. So that was the trend in US literacy until 2010. And then in all these different groups, suddenly, a few years later, adults cannot answer a question about toast because they read a paragraph, but they probably couldn't pay attention for the whole paragraph. So this is affecting all of us. And as Byrne Murdoch puts it, it's not just that we're seeing a decline in reading. He says, when you look at the pattern of results here, we are seeing a broader erosion in the human capacity for mental focus and application. This, I think, is one of the biggest threats facing humanity. As you may know, the word brain rot was recently added to the OED. And there's now, and TikTok's very new, it only really became popular during COVID. Now we have meta-analyses that are finding that people who watch a lot of it, the kids say it rots their brain, the kids say it destroys my focus, the kids say it makes me not able to pay attention. Well, guess what? The research is showing that too. So that's the cognitive degradation. I'll go a little faster on the next two. The social degradation, you've all heard about the loneliness epidemic. It's not just hitting kids, it's hitting especially men. American men and boys have much less time with others, much more likely to have no friends. But it is especially large among young people and especially young men. I want to show you also, this also just blew me away. This is a study, again, this is from John Byrne Murdoch taking other people's research. Unfortunately, the data set starts in 2014, so we can't see the hockey stick effect. But this is the big 5 personality traits. And if you look at the dark blue line, that's people over 60, they're not changing much, okay? But you look at the red line, that's young people, but actually it's Gen Z and millennials. So what we see is Gen Z and millennials are becoming less conscious, more neurotic, less agreeable, less extroverted. If we could break out the millennials from Gen Z, I promise you, we'd see millennials were a little bit, but not nearly that much, and Gen Z would be much worse than this. So we're having a very rapid change just since 2014 in the personality traits that make someone fit for relationships. We're supposed to say there's no good or bad personality, everyone's different, but there actually is. You don't want to marry, if you're going to marry someone, you really want them to be conscientious, not neurotic, and agreeable. Extroversion, that can be, but, okay? So young people's personalities are being changed in ways that make them less fit for marriage or relationships, and in ways that make them less fit for employment. This is a self-report from people of different ages. Are you a person, how strongly do you agree on a 5-point scale? I am a person who makes plans and follows through. Now, it was always the case that young people were less likely to say that, but as you see, it wasn't by much. But now it is. And again, if it was Gen Z, it would be down here. So young people are saying, no, I'm not a person who makes plans and follows through. I'm not a person who perseveres until finished. I'm easily distracted and I can be careless. Can I have a job? So again, there is no blame. I'm not blaming Gen Z. I'm saying we raised our kids in a way, we allowed the technology companies to take over childhood. We allowed a few giant companies to own our children's attention, to show them millions of short videos, to destroy their ability to pay attention, to stop them from reading books, and this is the result. And I work in a business school. Employers really don't like Gen Z. They find them very, very difficult to work with. Again, this is not a criticism of you. And I'll just share with you, okay, raise your hand if you're born after 1995. Okay, great, so a lot of people in Gen Z here. Here's the good news, and I have to always do this. This is what I do with my students at NYU too. I go through how bad this is. Here's the silver lining. It is so easy for you to stand out. The competition is so terrible, okay? So if you just get your habits in order, if you get your attention back, if you learn to focus, if you show up for work, if you persist, managers are going to love you, okay? All right, spiritual degradation. This is a whole giant topic I could go deep into, but I'll just show you the 2 saddest graphs in the anxious generation. One is, this is from that same study of American high school students. The percentage who say that I feel my life is not very useful on a 5-point scale, do you agree with that? And the people who said agree or strongly agree, it was only 8% back in the 70s. And it goes up a tiny bit, but really not much of a change. And then this happens. All of a sudden, the kids switch from in-person life to living on social media, and their life feels useless. Because it is. If all you're doing is consuming content, if all you're doing is watching short videos and liking people's posts, you're not adding any value to anyone, and you do feel useless. And this one is even sadder, and it's exactly the same. Once again, we see the millennials. When the millennials were the high school students, they were actually getting a little better. They were less likely to feel their life feels meaningless, and then that happens. So our young people are in deep, deep trouble. And if we want to talk about human flourishing, this is the least flourishing generation, certainly in modern times. I can't speak about medieval children, but and there's this wonderful Gen Z poet. We publish her. I have a Substack, afterbabel.com. It's free if you want to get our news, and we have all kinds of interesting things around this whole issue. Corey Jane, she's a wonderful poet, and she says the phone is the medicine that's surely making our souls die. She says, I know it's poison, but I drink anyway. You have to, because everyone else is drinking. You don't want to be left out. And our parents were right. It was the damn phones. Okay, so now let's switch gears. Now what's it doing to our country? What's it doing to our democracy and other democracies? So at least in the United States, we have a long tradition of thinking about this. So I'll just start with, as I said, the 90s was the most incredible decade. And it opened with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the sense that, not that history was over, but that all that struggle, all that was over. Now it's just liberal democracy from here on in. Oh, and then here's the internet. Oh, it's going to be amazing. Good luck, China, keeping out the internet. This is going to take down dictators everywhere. It's going to be the best thing that ever happened to democracy. And then we get the Arab Spring, proof that this is the best thing. Facebook brought down dictators across the Arab world. Amazing, wonderful. Occupy Wall Street. It's social justice. This is going to be the best thing to happen to democracy ever. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg was labeled Person of the Year. And here's what he then said when he was taking Facebook public in letter to investors. We reached a tipping point. Facebook aspires to build services that give people the power to share and help them once again transform many of our core institutions and industries. A society depends on its institutions. The great conservative insight, going back to Edmund Burke, is that institutions are complicated. Don't just jump in and change them. You don't understand them. Be very, very careful changing institutions. Things are probably going to go really wrong if you just jump in and change them. But he just jumped in and changed them. Or he changed the world such that all of our institutions are losing credit, capability, trust. And I believe this is the result. And this began happening. I believe 2014 is sort of a key year. You get the first global cancellation. You get Gamergate. You get all sorts of weird stuff begins in 2014. Now, why is this all happening? Well, James Madison, the designer of our Constitution, was a great psychologist, as many of the founders were. And they saw what happened to all previous democracies. They're consumed by factional fights, tribalism. The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man. And he talks about how groups, once you divide into parties, it's easy to inflame them with mutual animosity and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. It is a pretty good description of Congress, I think. It didn't used to be that way. He says, so strong is this propensity to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and violent conflicts. And that's a pretty good description of Twitter, right? I mean, just the constant little stupid stuff. Let's fight all the time. It didn't used to be this way. Originally, social media was like an address book. What a good idea. Put your address book online. I can see yours. You can see mine. I see your photos. You see mine. Very nice. No problem. There was MySpace and Friendster and the Facebook originally. No problem. Here's where the problem starts. Once you get the like button and the retweet button in the same year, now you've got the makings for super virality. The retweet button allows you, if I have 50 followers and one of them has 5,000 followers, and you can reach millions of people within an hour. So everything the dynamics change in this complex dynamical system in 2009. I have an article in The Atlantic tracing this process out and how it's doing in our democracy. One point in the story, one of the engineers at Twitter who designed the retweet button, he was on that team. They thought that it was going to be, again, a boon to democracy, elevate underrepresented communities, but instead, as he said, we just handed a loaded weapon to a 4-year-old, as he saw how Twitter mobs were forming. Before it was a convivial place, after all hell broke loose. The analogy that I find helpful to understand what happened to us in universities, in journalism, in basically all of the epistemic institutions. We went through a period from 2015 through really 2023, 2024, where a lot of us felt we had to walk on eggshells, teach on eggshells, be afraid of our students. The students, it turns out, weren't afraid of faculty. The students were afraid of other students. And it ultimately goes back to anything you say could be taken out of context, put up on social media, and your reputation is shot. And so it wasn't like this in 2010, 2012, but by 2015 to 2023, it was. The metaphor that felt right to me is that Twitter and other platforms, it was like handing out free dart guns to everybody, like actual dart guns with metal tips. You can shoot as many people as you want. Go ahead, just shoot people. Not going to kill them, but boy, it really hurts. And if you've ever been the subject of a Twitter mob, if you've ever been publicly shamed on social media, it's really painful. You don't die. Some do commit suicide, but you don't generally die, but it's really painful. Now, most of us don't want to shoot anybody, so we don't. But the far right loves to shoot people. who are on the moderate right especially, and the far left loves to shoot people who are on the moderate left especially. And Russia really took advantage of this. They've been very skillful at fomenting dissension since the 50s and 60s of the last century, and they used this very strategically to put us against each other. So I think social media acted as though if you gave everybody a dart gun and license to shoot anybody, what kind of society is that? How would you carry on research? How would you disagree with someone? And so this hit a lot of our institutions, especially those that lacked viewpoint diversity. This, I believe, is what led to what's called the Great Awakening, which is a new form of progressivism that ultimately, I think, has been catastrophic for the left and the Democratic Party. This is what I believe got Donald Trump elected. This is what pushed a lot of people, including a lot of non-white people, over towards the Republican Party. So the Great Awakening, I think, was the disaster brought about by social media for the left. It would not have happened without social media. And the astonishing things we've seen from the right, an attempt to overthrow an election, and many other things. Again, none of this would have happened without social media. So, as Jeffrey Rosen said in The Atlantic a while ago, America is living James Madison's nightmare, while meanwhile, just proof of that. This is The Economist, but there's a couple of different outfits that have done similar things. If you rate the number and quality of the world's democracies, we reached a peak in the early 2010s. 2011, 2012, by a couple of different measures, was the peak. Here you see it was sort of consistent, but in the 90s, you get a huge increase as the Iron Curtain falls, democracy spreads. So we reach this very high level, the highest level in history, by 2015, and then this happens. So democracies are becoming fewer and lower quality. And in the meantime, China is living Mao's dream, because as Tristan Harris says, the founder of the Center for Humane Technology, these technologies are helping authoritarians be better authoritarians, but they're making democracies be worse democracies. So that's the issue of the founders and factionalism. Now, more briefly, many of you might remember from whenever you had to read Democracy in America back when schools used to assign books. De Tocqueville, French aristocrat, travels around America in the 1830s, writes this really glowing report for Europeans who don't want to believe, they want to believe that the American experiment's a failure, you can't live without a king, they're a bunch of hicks. But he writes this glowing report, and what most amazed de Tocqueville is that when there's a problem in a town, he says, in France, everyone just sits around and waits for the king to take care of it. In Britain, they sit around, they wait for the nobles to take care of it. But in America, it's like a nation of Ben Franklin. It's like, okay, let's form a committee, let's all, we'll all contribute money, we'll have a charter, we'll build the bridge, we'll build the hospital, we'll do whatever needs to be done. The art of association, that was a beautiful phrase that he used to describe this uniquely American ability to just come together to solve problems. And this is the foundation of his portrayal of what is democracy in America. If men are to remain civilized, the art of associating together must grow and improve in the same ratio in which the equality of conditions is increased. So I ask you, has social media improved our ability to associate? Now, obviously, there are lots of, if you're doing any of those things, having a Facebook group is really helpful. So, of course, lots of good stuff happens. I don't want to go overboard and say it's all bad. Obviously, it helps lots. It makes the ease of association is now so much greater, and many people are using that to good effect. But when we look at the quality of our democratic conversation, as Noah Yuval Harari says, democracy is a conversation. When that conversation took place in the Agora in Athens, it was one kind of democracy, because that's the kind of conversation. When it took place in newspapers and television and radio and kitchen table conversation, when it took place, as it did in the 20th century in America, it was a different kind of conversation. And when it moves onto Twitter, I think it looks more like this. And so a lot of our platforms, especially where politics is discussed, have become a hellscape, certainly nothing that leads us to improve our art of association. I would say that social media has rendered us more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for the common good. And looking ahead, as AI plays more and more of a role in social media and more of a role in our lives, my prediction is that AI is not exactly going to make us better at interacting with human beings. It's going to start taking our attachments, our sexual relationships, our therapy relationships. So we can expect the art of association to decay much more rapidly as AI moves more deeply into people's lives. And lastly, and this I think is really the deepest point, and one that, well, here, I'll show it to you. When when I got my, when I had an iPhone, in 2008, once Siri came out, I forget when that was, my kids were like, 4 and 8 or something like that. And they would love to play, they would take my phone and they would talk to Siri. And they would always say, "Hey Siri, why are you so stupid? Ha, 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 ha." And they'd be really mean to her because they could. And it was funny to them because there's no consequence. So, so hold that in mind. And now turn to Frederick Douglass, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. I read this in grad school, and this is the passage that has stayed with me ever since. Douglass, he describes growing up on a plantation on the Eastern Shore. It's agricultural. And the description, it reminded me of the accounts of living in a concentration camp in winter in Poland. I mean, you're cold, you have no food. I mean, it's horrible, horrible life as a slave on a plantation in Eastern Maryland. And at a certain age, I forget how old he was, the slaveholder transfers him to his daughter, who's in her 30s or 20s, in Baltimore. And he says, and when she first meets him, she smiles at him. No white person had ever smiled at him before. And he says, he falls in love with her. She's amazing. My new mistress proved to be all that she appeared, kindest heart and finest feelings. He says, she had never had a slave under her control. And prior to her marriage, she'd been dependent on her own industry. She was a business person. She was making something and selling it. And therefore, she had been preserved from the blighting and dehumanizing effects of slavery. She even taught him to read, for which she got in trouble, because that was illegal to teach an African American to read. And he says, her face was made of heavenly smiles and her voice of tranquil music. But alas, this kind of heart had but a short time to remain such. The fatal poison of irresponsible power was already in her hands, and it gradually commenced its infernal work. When you have absolute power over a person who has no rights of any kind, and you can say, "Hey Siri, why are you so stupid?" You can do anything you want to them. This is obviously horrible and inhumane for the person you're doing it to. But Douglass's point is that it is corrupting, degrading, and demonizing to the enslaver, to the person with power. This is what, I was already concerned about this 2 years ago with AI. Now that we're beginning to understand what agents do, we're all going to have as many agents as we want. We can order them around. We can do anything we want with them. And what's the first use of everything online? It's pornography. So already, certainly many young men are creating their customized, idealized, personalized sex bot, sex slave, sex servant, whatever you want to call it. Ani is offered up already pre-formulated, incredibly obscene, incredibly smutty the way she talks to you right away. And so I think what we're doing is we're putting all of us in the position of having the fatal poison of irresponsible power as these things get more and more human, and they're soon going to be put into robot bodies that will gradually become very much like human bodies. This is our life. We're all going to become enslavers in a sense, and this is going to rot our character and destroy our morality. Okay, now let's turn to solutions. Can these technologies be made less destructive? So this is what I argued is happening currently. I'm not saying it's irreversible, but this, I believe, is a correct description of the trends that are happening currently from social media and early AI. This community is organized around the mission to use technology to serve the nation and the world. So in a moment, we're going to talk about what to do about it. I'm really looking forward to talking with President Kornbluth and to hear your questions. I'll just offer a little bit to start the conversation. The best quote I've found, the best idea, is this incredible passage from Abe Lincoln when this is 1862, very dark times in the Civil War. He's planning on issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. He knows he's going to do this giant thing that's going to be very hard for people to understand. And he says, the dogmas of the quiet past, before the Civil War, are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. And then he says, we must disenthrall ourselves. That's what I want to put on the table here. I'm going to suggest we need to disenthrall ourselves from technology. Most of us are enthralled by technology. And at MIT, I would imagine it's the Kool-Aid that you drink as soon as you show up on campus, and you probably already drank it. And I imagine that there's more of a thrall of technology here, but maybe I'm wrong. And here's the good news. In the past 2 years, there has been a parents' rebellion against social tech. There is a gigantic techlash happening right now. It really gathered steam after Australia's bill went into effect on December 10th. They raised the age to 16, and the rest of the world looked at it and said, why can't we do that too? And now they are. And this is driven primarily by mothers. Mothers of the world felt their kids being pulled away. They didn't know what to do about it. They were at their wits' end. And when my book came out and said, you're right, here's what's happening, here's why it's happening, here's what we do, 4 norms. And the 4 norms are no social media, no smartphone till high school, no social media till 16, phone-free schools, and far more independence, free play, responsibility in the real world. Those 4 norms. And everyone's like, yeah, we can do that, because they solve the collective action problem. If you're the only one who doesn't give your kid a phone in 6th grade, you're imposing a cost on your kid. She's the only one. But if half the class doesn't, then it's no problem. Those kids go out and play together. So the good news is that there is human agency. We don't just have to sit back and let Silicon Valley do whatever the hell it wants to our kids. We can actually fight back. We can actually impose some rules and regulations. So how could tech better serve the nation and the world? I just want to put this out there. I suggest that you start seeing social technology as being much more like a Frankenstein monster. It's something created out of bizarre science that ends up stomping the world and killing people. I suggest that we have a generally negative view of social media and of AI. Obviously, there's lots of good that will come with it. Curing cancer would be great. I don't think it balances out the existential risks, but curing cancer would be nice. So if we start with a much more negative, emotionally negative or ambivalent view than I think is common now, that I think is the start for the tech community. And again, I'm not saying all tech or all tech companies. I'm focusing on a few industries that have a track record of destroying human value and human capital at an industrial scale. The next rule is hands off the children. Never again will we allow tech companies to just roll out a product to all children, and then we'll wait 15 years and see what happens. And I showed you what happened. I suggest that, actually, I should have asked about the psychology department here, what you have, but obviously cognitive science, I imagine, is, yeah. So there are ways of looking at society that engineers and tech people have that are brilliant, and there are very different ways that humanists have and very different ways that social scientists have. And I think we need more social psychologists and sociologists involved in technology, because to understand the massive negative externalities that are being imposed on societies. And I think that we need to start holding tech companies liable for damages. The social media companies have never been sued until now, finally, but they were able to, a lot of kids are dead because of design choices that social media companies made, and those parents were never able to sue because of Section 230. So I think we need to start treating them like other companies, that if you make a product that's killing people, you actually should be held responsible. And so I look forward to your ideas. So in conclusion, here's the argument that I made about these 2 major effects. And I gave you 2 reasons to not believe me. I don't want you walking out of here feeling all depressed. I want you to think like, I think he went too far, but actually he had a point about this. Let me think about that. And again, predicting the future is a fool's game. I can't predict the future, but I'm showing you some trends, and I hope that you will consider them and then work to change them. Thank you very much. I've loved being here, and let's talk.
Thanks so much. That was terrific. So as you know, we solicited questions before your lecture. I will say you've answered a number of the questions here. In fact, the first question was on correlation versus causation.
Okay.
So you've certainly addressed your thoughts about that. But just a few things. We don't have a lot of time. And you talked about some solutions going forward, but of interest to folks in this audience is, do you think the damage done by social media on Gen Z is reversible?
Yeah. So there's good news and there's bad news. I'm going to give you the bad news first. So the bad news is what it means to be a sensitive period in neural development and psychology. What it means is that experiences that happen in that time get in structurally and become permanent. And there's a sensitive period for language learning, there's a sensitive period for cultural learning, roughly age 8 or 9 through 15, it looks like, where you become a member of a culture. And so the bad news is that if what I wrote about sensitive periods is correct, then the answer is that the damage will be permanent, it is baked in. And if we look at the generation as a whole, it's not as though when Gen Z reaches 40, they're suddenly going to go back up to where they would have been if they'd had a healthy, normal childhood. That's the bad news. The good news is that anyone who changes their habits will get amazing results. And I can say this with confidence because I've been teaching this course at NYU for 12 years now, 4 years with undergrads. Especially the students who are on social media, I used to let them pick what they wanted to change. You have to change yourself in the course of the course and measure it and talk about how you changed. And I used to let them pick their own topic, but now it's clear device issues are the number one. And for those that are spending 3 hours a day or more on social media or video games, I now have a rule. You have to work on this. I can't help you if you're on social media for 3 hours a day. And some of them are on for 5 or 6 hours a day. And the heavy users, when they get off, first just take it off your phone. You can still check it on your computer, but don't have it with you all the time. We walk them through it. The ones who get off have universally miraculous results. These are 19-year-old undergrads. They're through the sensitive period, but as you know, brain development, the frontal cortex, neuroplasticity, still a lot there till 25, and then even later. And it's like plants that were dehydrated coming back to life. They say, I'm able to do my homework now in 2 hours a night, and I have so much time now, I've started exercising, and I'm getting more sleep. And of course, if you start exercising and getting more sleep, and you're not stressed, of course your mental health is going to improve radically just from that. And they go out with friends, and they're in New York City. They come to New York City to scroll on their bed. Suddenly they're going out and enjoying the city. So I've seen so many stories of remarkable transformation in 19-year-olds. So that's the good news. If you change your habits, if you regain your attention, you're going to get great results.
And have you changed your own habits since you started this study? And how do you, start this area? How do you, what have you done, and what sort of results have you seen?
So I'm a little unusual in that I don't really have a problem with my phone because I never had slot machine apps. I never had social media or video game. I never had anything on it that was a dopamine trigger. I'm a workaholic. I'm always at a computer. I have lots of computers wherever I am. So I'm always at a computer with 3 screens. So I do have some issues about just like when I'm working, as soon as I get to a hard part of writing, I say, I wonder how my book's doing on Amazon. I go over and I check that. It's like, so I understand the phenomena. And briefly during the crypto craze, I invested, meaning I threw money away. And and I had like Gemini or whatever, and and I would check 30 or 40 times a day. Like, did it go through? What was, so I was addicted. So I understand what it's like. But even though, on my phone, my phone is really not a problem. It's just a tool for me. But I'm working with an executive coach, and after talking with me about my habits, she said, you know what, John? You need to install a web browser blocker. I just installed Freedom. And she said, you need to stop checking your Amazon ranking. You need to stop, But it's actually really relevant because it's like, how are you doing in the world? Oh, I'm doing really well. And that's, of course, what social media does to the entire generation. You have to always track how you're doing. So, of course, you're desperate to know how you're doing. So I am using more self-control strategies now.
Do you ever wonder how many people at a Zoom meeting are actually in the meeting?
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to,
I always assume that most people are multitasking.
Yeah, exactly. So we had different questions from faculty members, students, and staff. So this one's from a faculty member. What should be our response as instructors? How do we equip the generation for a changing world? What styles of teaching and learning would best address the challenges that this generation's students face?
Well, so first, the AI challenge is so great and is changing so fast. It was one thing when ChatGPT wasn't that good, but now these Chat and Claude, they're all really, really good and smart and good writers. So it's a gigantic problem for all of us. I've been lucky in that my only course now is this flourishing class, and so because I can say, we're here to make you better. And to get better, you have to do hard things over and over again. So because I'm able to say, like, in the total course of this, There's a reason why I'm not letting you use AI at all. And that's the policy. And you have to say whether you used it or not. And of course, you could lie to me, but we're talking about identity formation. And I just want you to know that if you do lie to me, that means that you are a liar. And I want you to sit with that. So, so I can do that because I'm teaching the special course.
Right.
But my colleagues in accounting and management can't do that. The student, especially the undergrads, they face cutthroat competition to get the highest GPA, to get the interviews. So I don't know what they're going to do. But the key thing, so the thing I would suggest as a social psychologist is, the more we're in a cat and mouse game of cop and robber, and that's really bad. But the more we can enlist students in understanding why they need to do hard things over and over again, and why, yes, you're going to use AI once you're out in the workplace. Yes, we adults use it to become more productive, but in order to get to that stage, taking shortcuts means you're not going to get there. Mm-hmm. So we have to sort of frame it all. And that's why I actually think, I don't know what you're doing, but I think presidential leadership, especially when they show up on campus, do you talk about AI to the incoming students? Do you do any framing that would help the professors out in
this is actually sort of a new territory for us. We do have now a new committee on AI in education, and I think this will be part of it. Not only thinking about how we should move forward pedagogically, but how do we think about our overall regulation AI policies on campus? Mm-hmm. How do we introduce, as you say, the features of what AI is good for and not good for? You mentioned at NYU, you mentioned when we were talking before that at NYU you were thinking about sort of media-free zones, mm-hmm. computer-free zones, and we haven't really talked about that a lot yet mm-hmm. here.
Yeah, I'll just mention it. Maybe it's something that you could do here too. So our president, Linda Mills, is really concerned about this problem. She's a former social worker. She really thinks about social relationships, and we can all see it. We all see the students, who are just isolated and lonely at college. And so we're launching an initiative called NYU IRL, and in each of our three main campuses, Abu Dhabi and Shanghai and New York, there's this place called The Nest, which is a beautiful space. You check your phone at the door. There's board games. You hang out. So we're creating physical places, and we're going to try to do some framing policies. Obviously, as you know, as president, you actually don't have much control over your faculty. You can't really tell them to do anything.
I noticed
But you do have tremendous ability to at least do some framing.
Infrastructure.
Yes. Like the way you talk about it.
Yes.
And so, so Linda and I are going to be talking a lot about what it is to be a college student and what's so amazing about NYU and New York City, and here's how you get the most out of it. Because one of the great things I can say about Gen Z is I've not met a single one who is in denial. I've not met a single member of Gen Z who says, no, the phones are great, no problem. Everybody understands it. Mm-hmm. And so they actually, if you show them a way to get stronger and smarter and more sociable, they embrace it.
And as you were talking about the communities, people are generally relieved when the peer pressure element of it goes away. So when structurally we, disallow it in particular areas, I think we've talked to students about this, people are actually relieved by it.
Yeah, it's a collective action problem.
Exactly.
And so leadership with both words and with policies can really help everyone out. If there are good norms that you want to promote,
yes.
the more you talk about them and get faculty to talk about. And it's also really pleased, you have a new program in computing ethics or something. What's that called? CERC?
Well, CERC.
What's it called?
CERC.
What does it stand for?
Social and ethical responsibility.
Computing.
Social and ethical responsibility of computing. So just it's like this has to be part of the public conversation, especially here.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we have, a student asked something I thought was interesting. In your books and interviews, you have primarily blamed modern technology for the anxiety of millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
But you seem less interested in, as you say, IRL, sources of stress and anxiety, climate change, lack of housing, government actions, et cetera. And so the question is it possible our anxiety mainly comes not from the medium, but from the message?
Yeah, no, it's not. And here's why. So this especially hit 10 to 14-year-old girls around the world first and hardest. If that happened in 2018, I would say, Greta Thunberg, she had a lot of influence on young girls. So, maybe that's why all the girls were checking into hospitals in 2018. But it wasn't 2018, it was 2012, 2013. And a lot of people said to me, the Newtown massacre, that horrible Connecticut shooting was 2012. All of our kids have had lockdown drills since then, so maybe that's it. Really? Then why did kids in Australia, New Zealand, Scandinavia start doing the same thing at the same time. Pressures from the world can be discouraging, but they don't cause depression. Depression is about your relationship with others. If you feel isolated and alone, you get depressed. It's not because you think the world has all these problems. You and I grew up in the 70s, and the nuclear war threats, overpopulation, there were all these threats. Did it make us depressed? No, it makes you energized, you join protests, you do things. So events in the outside world don't really change our mental health. It's our relationships. And this social tech has been devastating for our relationships.
Yeah. Interesting. The other thing that a staff member reports that the pull of technology is creating a gulf between the generations.
Yeah.
Making it much harder, for instance, for grandparents to connect with grandchildren, to some extent parents and children. And do you have any thoughts about that? How to improve that?
Oh yeah. So as a cultural psychologist and someone who studies the evolution of culture, our great trick as humans is culture. And what we do is each generation makes discoveries and we pass it down to the next generation. Culture has always been transmitted vertically. In some societies, it's transmitted vertically with just a little bit of change, and others with more change, but it's always been transmitted vertically until 2020. It's no longer transmitted vertically. Young people are now, almost all of their input jacks are filled up with short videos made by other young people. When you and I were kids, we watched Bugs Bunny, and that was made, none of those episodes were made by other kids. In fact, a lot of them were made by our grandparents' generation.
Yeah.
And we learned about opera, like 19th century opera, from watching Bugs Bunny. So there was there used to be intergenerational transmission of culture, and we learned some history. We knew things that happened in previous decades. But what's happening now is young people are largely cut off from the accumulated wisdom of humanity. They're not reading books. They're not talking to their grandparents very much. We have a quote we have a new book for kids, The Amazing Generation. If you have kids age 8 to 13, get The Amazing Generation. It's got a graphic novel that really motivates the kids to actually want to have a life in the real world, not online. We have a quote there from a young man who says, I wish that I'd gotten to know my grandfather better before he died, instead of always playing video games when he was over. So if we lose the intergenerational transmission of culture, we're dead as a civilization. So that's happening.
So I'm going to have two questions that are maybe a little more hopeful before we end.
Good idea.
So people don't shuffle out of here depressed.
They won't be literally depressed. They'll just be discouraged.
They'll just be discouraged. Fair enough. Yeah, okay. I feel much better.
Okay.
So, you've commented a little bit, and we all know about the misinformation crisis that's been facilitated by social media. Do you think there's hope for a version of social media that won't brew these falsehoods and amplify these antagonistic factors?
There's just one idea I've had for that, which is as long as it's based on an intentional model and it has virality and it has not just anonymity, but like entire anonymity, where you can be a Russian agent, you can be anybody. It's going to be a hellscape. There's really no way to change it. But and there's a really important word, enshittification. Have you heard of that? Because almost everything, it used to be great. The internet used to be great. Facebook, Twitter, they were fun places originally, and then they all get enshittified. And so Cory Doctorow has a book. He talks about the process of enshittification. Huge amounts of money are invested. The company has to recoup that, has to pay off the investors. So first you get scale, everyone comes on, it's fun, you're not squeezing the users, but then you got to squeeze them to pay the advertisers, because that's how you make revenue. And then you have to squeeze, once you have all the advertisers, you've killed off newspapers, now you squeeze the advertisers, you keep all the money yourself. So that's the enshittification process. And if you think about the money that the AI companies have raised, it's orders of magnitude bigger than was raised for Facebook or Twitter. So the enshittification that is just starting, advertising on ChatGPT, but don't worry, it won't influence what we're told for at least 6 weeks. We promise that. So I'm expecting all of this to get horribly enshittified. What could happen instead?
Where's the hope?
Okay. I am kind of slow at getting to that. The hope is this. The platforms that don't get enshittified are things like eBay or Airbnb. Because even though you don't know the name of the person you're transacting with, the company does. The company knows everybody. And therefore you have reputation, and there are reputational consequences. So my dream is that somebody will come up with a model of social media which is either philanthropically driven or at least partially philanthropic, because it doesn't cost much to make these things. I mean, Pornhub has like 12 employees, or OnlyFans. I think Scott Galloway's always saying it has like a couple dozen people. If we had a social media platform on which everyone was authenticated, that would wipe out the sextortion problem instantly. Literally millions of kids get sextorted every year, literally millions, and that would go away instantly. So yeah, if we had a different business model, we could have good social media.
So can you imagine, not just social media, but in general, if you think about a more positive role of technology for humanity, what sort of uplifting message will you leave us with there?
Just that.
Run.
That, yeah. I just keep going back to Phil Tetlock, who goes through all kinds of predictions that turned out to be wrong. And again, a lot of the reason they turn out to be wrong is that people rise up and do something. So that's why I showed you the slide of the Mother's Rebellion, because it's incredibly inspiring. And so if this community, this is one of the most powerful communities in the world in terms of the future of technology. So if you can change the discourse around this, change the way we're thinking about it, stop the speeding train going over a cliff, then there really is hope. It's always been wrong to bet against America. It's always been wrong to bet against humanity. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. But I am expecting, we are seeing a lot more young people rising up and creating organizations and becoming activists. So I think that we are seeing people rise across generations. So that actually does give me hope.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.